and welcome to another week of Oh Ship. So it's been a great 2022 already, but we're going to tap into some even better guests this year. And one of those guests is a friend of mine and someone I've also had a chance to work with, who has had some incredible, notable roles in her career. Uh, I met her when she was the CMO at Perry Ellis. She has been the CMO of Celebrity Cruise Lines. She was the SVP of marketing at Macy's at one point. And she's now most recently the CMO at Starboard Cruise Services, which is part of LVMH. What I think is so interesting about that role is actually it brings together her retail experience and her cruise experience into one role because Starboard is effectively a retailer that operates in cruise ships. But what I think is far more interesting about Lisa is her style of leadership. I got to experience and see it firsthand while she was at Perry Ellis. And I think she brings a very charismatic, but also pragmatic approach to leadership. And so today we decided that we would have maybe a healthy debate or certainly a healthy discussion around the style of leaders of pragmatic versus idealistic leaders. And we look forward to basically challenging each other on camera with some questions that we prepared in advance, but we haven't warned each other what those questions are. So we're going to see if, I don't know if we hope we don't catch each other off guard in this kind of open discussion, but I'm hoping, if nothing else, it creates for some great content for all of you watching, and hopefully not too many oh shit moments for us live on the air. And with that, here we go with another week of oh shit. Lisa, welcome to Oh Ship. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
It's again, I appreciate you taking the time. I think this is going to be a really fun episode. One of my favorite episodes of Oh Ship ever was when I had Scott Monty on, who I think is a kind of equally dynamic and interesting character like you. We challenged each other, which created I think a great dynamic. I want to again remind people of the rules of this kind of episode, of these kind of 5v5 questions. So Lisa and I met in advance. We agreed on what the subject we wanted to be. We then kind of set some kind of the terms of, I thought, what would make for a good and interesting conversation. Lisa has then prepared 5 questions in private. I prepared 5 questions in private. We agreed not to tell each other what the questions were in advance because we felt that it would be far more interesting if it was spontaneous and they had a chance to just see what came right their instinctual answer. We're going to put that out there. We're also going to put the questions into the chat. So if you're watching live, whether you're watching on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube or any of the other channels that we broadcast or ship on, if you see the questions in there, feel free to chime in directly in the chat. Lisa and I can see the chat, and we might react to that, or even call some of you out if we find some things that we think are really interesting. I think the only fair thing to do, Lisa, is to let you go first as the guest. So I look forward to seeing what you've got for me.
All right, let's hit it. Then I'm jumping into the core of the matter and the heart of our discussion, which is about the differences of leadership. So from my perspective, I've always seen you as an idealistic and visionary type of leader. Well, I tend to be myself as more of the pragmatist leader. So what do you see, Freddie, from your perspective as the key differences between those styles of leadership?
I think there's a simple way of answering that and a not so simple way of answering that. When I think about these two types of leaders at the most basic level, I think when you think about an idealistic leader, a visionary leader, which again I think is a compliment. So it's you can think of people maybe that have these giant pie in the sky kind of ideas. I think you think of people that maybe break boundaries and go into new innovative areas. Um, I think that those people can also sometimes be perceived as optimists, almost seeing the world through like rose-colored glasses. Sometimes, frankly, I've argued that my innovation or kind of big dream thinking is I'm just too stupid, frankly, to realize that I might actually fail at any of these things. So that kind of hopeless optimism, maybe is served me well and not served me well in some instances as well. Um, when you think about typically about a pragmatic leader, I think you're thinking about people that look at things, at least how I visualize it, through some level of kind of realism, and saying, look, the how we get there, the fact that we have to succeed is more important, than maybe trying to bend the bounds of reality every time, but that success is about stating a goal and achieving it and getting it there. Um, I'd like to believe, and I know that I've certainly had quite a few companies in my career where I was probably a little too early, and I kind of always joked my startup guide was the most ambitious thing I've ever tried to do. Arguably too ambitious because it failed, but I'd like to believe that maybe through learning through that I'm what's a nice way of saying this, a realistic idealist, or idealistic realist could be another way of phrasing it. I think now that I try really hard to set big, lofty, ambitious goals, but also break things down into smaller attainable chunks, so that you can kind of move towards achieving bigger goals with maybe smaller micro goals in between them, so you don't end up with too much egg on your face, frankly.
It's funny that you talk about it that way, because I think the idea of there is definitely a blend, of you got to have the big idea. Being a pragmatic leader should not eliminate the possibility of big, bold, visionary ideas. But I think where we're going to end up continuing to discuss it is it's where the brain kind of focuses the attention,
Hmm.
and the pragmatic leader, like myself,
Hmm.
tends to spend more of my brain time thinking about the how to get the
Hmm.
team there, how to move the idea forward, and maybe just balancing more on that idea, the how.
Hmm. So one of the things I think when you think about these like visionary type leaders is this sense that like I hate using Steve Jobs or someone like that, but kind of like the classic archetype of this. Like you get these folks that when you give people these big vision ideas or these big inspirational lofty goals, that is really good at inspiring people, because I think it gives people talk about like classic Simon Sinek, like the people buy into the why more than the what or the how of kind of what you do. Um, so my second question for you is, if accepting that communication is effectively key to any leader, as a pragmatic leader yourself, basically, what have you learned that has worked in in terms of like inspiring your team, your people, or all the people, whether it's on your specific team or even maybe your peers around you, to get on board with these like new ideas and strategies?
Maybe because my ultimate core is from coming at things from the marketing perspective. But
Mm-hmm.
to me, it's about the way that the communication is happening, and it's got to be grounded in transparency and plain speak.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Also, I'm sure the folks that are watching the show, and those of us that have lived our lives in the marketing world, we can see the eye roll when too much jargon is used. You know, the tech stack and the this and the that.
Yeah.
Like, you can literally see the eye roll when you're trying to have that conversation with your peers in
Yeah.
operations or your peers in sales. Like, they don't like it,
Yeah.
they don't get it, they don't need to get it. And so I think that that's hits me in the face, in every job I've had, as a marketing person in a functional, like, operating company, to be transparent and speak in plain speak. And not only does it make a huge difference in my success as a leader of kind of selling in my ideas and getting the support of my peers and my CEO. But it also is critically important with the team. The folks that are waiting for the direction and that are kind of looking for how the heck are we going to get there. It has worked for me. This the way to communicate, to strip it down. Whether it's the idea or the work that needs to be done or the how of it all, to the most transparent and plain speak as possible.
I'm not counting this as one of my questions. I want that on record, but I have to know, do you have a couple like jargon, things that just are your ultimate, like, just like a little bit of you dies inside every time you hear them?
Oh God, tech stack is definitely up there on the
Yeah,
list. I can't
yeah.
stand that term. I don't know.
No, no,
Martech.
no brainer as
Yeah.
like what, and I actually said it this morning in a meeting, and I just died and cringed a little bit. I was like, I can't believe I just said my pet peeve, no brainer. Because it was like, as soon as you say that, I just feel like it's instant jinx. You're like, oh, this is going to be the hardest thing ever now.
I was invited to one of these, fabulous, like world class marketing consultancy groups to their conference, trying to sell me a subscription.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
okay,
yeah,
I went to the conference. I'm like, sure, I look forward to the content.
yeah,
And I was sitting in the session around, simplifying and streamlining marketing operations.
yeah,
And the whole presentation not only was filled with like 18 forms and 18 frameworks of 50 steps.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
already like, okay,
yeah,
I'm done here. There's no simplification. But every terrible term you can imagine was loaded in, and I don't think it's effective.
yeah, yeah.
That
A
kind of
couple years ago, there was some great things doing the rounds of the internet. It was like meeting, like buzzword bingo, I think they called it. It was like, you could just like you could like you just and it literally was like a little flash app or HTML app, and you could just click them in the app in the screen, and like as you were like kind of quietly mocking your coworkers. Good stuff. Hopefully, no one ever turned that into a drinking game. I think that could have gotten pretty messy pretty quickly. Okay.
Good
Anyway,
answer. Let me turn it back then to you. Do you see any inherent major differences on how idealistic leaders approach communication?
that is a good question. Let me think on that a little bit. So I think that, let me deconstruct this a little bit. So I think ultimately there are three different types of styles of leadership. So you've got the kind of more top down, is my way or the highway kind of the driving force of the leader, kind of like autocratic type of system, right? Then you've got some types of leaders I think are very democratic. So they're, hey, I'm going to build consensus. I'm going to talk to, everyone in the group, and I'm going to help, build all that together and get all these voices and make sure those voices are part of the way that leader works. And then I think you've got the third one, which is kind of a much more, laid back, let people kind of stumble on their own, find their own path. They're there like a player coach. Maybe they get in and they kind of guide them a little bit, from time to time. But ultimately, it's a very pulled back, step back kind of approach to leadership. So when I think about like how you think about an idealistic leader might approach some of these things, you could argue that, like, okay, with a more of a top-down approach. I think you've got these like uber visionaries. Sometimes I think these people maybe have kind of a low social EQ, and they don't maybe think about anything except for the big vision. And in that situation, they're like pushing it down to the folks, and you get on board or you basically get the hell out. I think, again, jobs might be kind of along that way. I don't know what someone like an Elon Musk, who probably also followed this, may fall into something comparable. I think when you've got an idealistic leader that is more of a democratic one, that's probably where I fall into the spectrum. I think that, like, for me, I think about the vision. Then I like to share it in small doses with lots of little people, and then get their ideas and then build them back into the main thought. And then I feel like that's a way to like harness their passion and take them along for the ride, because there's a sense of ownership that everyone has in it. I'm trying to imagine how the idealistic works in kind of like the laissez-faire kind of approach, where it's like, it's like, you could be into my vision or not. We're still doing it. I don't know if that one quite works
I don't
as
see it
well.
happening. I think they'd be going out
but
of business.
I do see how I think that's how I kind of imagine those breaking down more from an idealistic standpoint. I think when you've got pragmatic folks, then I think there's again, it ultimately comes down to people's style, but I can imagine more pragmatic leaders probably fall more into that democratic approach. Well, I don't know. Maybe some people just do it through force of will. Where do you think, out of interest, where do you think you fit in on that spectrum?
I hope I'm in the Democratic camp.
Nice,
I mean,
good.
that's what I'd like to think. If any of my team is
Yeah,
listening, maybe they'll
yeah,
feel
yeah,
differently. But I
yeah.
hope that's what I'd like to think I am.
Yeah, I've had some bosses on the kind of autocratic spectrum, and I actually even I had the kind of step back boss. Actually, my old boss at Sapient, Gaston Legorbeau, who I was awesome, and I'll never forget it. One time, it's slightly off subject, but a very kind of a great moment. So I'm such an entrepreneur that when I joined Sapient, I didn't really know how to, I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. I'd never been in a giant company like that before, or it felt giant to me with 10,000, 13,000 employees when I was there. And I remember going to him one day and saying, so am I supposed to like have a meeting with you where I like report back stuff that I'm doing? Because he was so laid back on it. And he said, no, no, no. He's like, I'm watching. He's like, you're doing great. And he goes, if you ever start, not to be rude, but if you ever start effing it up, you'll hear from me. Otherwise, just keep doing what you're
Keep
doing. I'm
going.
like,
Right.
all right, cool, thank you. And that actually worked really well for me, because I kind of bristled a little bit at authority. But and I consider him to also be a visionary style leader for what
Hmm.
it's worth.
Hmm.
Um, cool. Okay, so I think it's my turn, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, let me look at my notes here one second. Okay, so let me ask you, what is another leadership trait of someone like you that considers yourself a pragmatic leader?
Okay, let me think for a sec. I would, I think another biggie that is all about the style of leadership, it's not necessarily about the ideation, is the notion of driving for ownership and accountability. It's, I think we have all worked in companies with like amazing ideas and amazing strategies, but for whatever reason it just like doesn't move forward because there's not a constant attention to being clear about, okay, where does the ownership lie, you know what
Mhm,
uh, what needs to happen, to kind of move the
mhm,
step along. And for much of my career I've worked in highly matrixed organizations,
mhm,
which is fine. It just is that way. The functional areas and kind of the standalone sort of business unit aspects. And it's more important than ever in a matrixed organization because
mhm,
there's just so many people. It's very interdependent. I'm sure everybody's heard of the RACI,
mhm,
concept of responsible, accountable,
mhm,
consulted, and informed. I mean, it's old school, but it's extremely
mhm,
powerful and helpful for people
mhm,
to know what is expected of them and where they fit in the movement of getting an idea executed, fully executed. So I would
mhm,
say ownership and accountability. And even it's a bummer when you can watch great ideas not coming to fruition because
mhm,
it's not been clear who owns
mhm.
it, who is accountable.
Yeah, old school or not, like I'm actually a huge fan of this world. Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And sometimes some systems just work really well, and I'm sometimes astounded by the lack of clarity you see in some organizations around this. Where I won't say the specific company, but I there's one business I had a leadership role at, and everyone used to show up to every meeting, and it was always like there was like they're like, why are there 16 people here? And it was like, because no one knew what anyone actually did. So everyone was so afraid that they would be missing out on it that everyone would just show up to everything. So it's like,
Yeah, and I can
death
imagine
by
that.
reading. Yeah.
And I can imagine that when they left the meeting, nothing
Yeah.
really got done
Oh,
because it really
yeah.
wasn't entirely clear who was supposed to do that
Well,
next
no
thing.
one had any time to do any work because everyone was always in a meeting, and we actually did this big racy exercise, and it was like everyone in the company, you could just see their shoulders just go, "Oh God, I actually understand what my job is now." And I've been, and then you'd also had people being like, "I feel like I've been doing like four people's jobs for about 2 years," and be like, "You were," because you didn't actually understand what your job was. So
Well,
yeah,
and
I love
unfortunately,
this.
that may still continue. We
Yeah,
may
yeah,
have
exactly right.
people that are going to do multiple jobs in multiple roles, but at least they're clear about it.
So anyway, I'm a fan. I think that's great advice and great insight. So I
All right. Well,
think
then
you're up.
I'm coming up
Okay.
and I'm going right to the heart of the O ship vibe. And I'm coming to you to ask for your O ship moment of an example when your idealism or absolute focus on a grand vision kind of negatively impacted you.
I'm impressed that you already asked me for one example. Otherwise, we'd have to extend this episode of O Ship. So, and cool. I normally get to ask other people their O Ship moments. So I probably should have seen this one coming in hindsight. Um, wow, what I want to limit it down to. I think a great example of this, again, I kind of referred to this earlier with my startup guide. Um, I think that as a reminder of anyone who's never watched a ship before, as some context. So I had a company in the, I guess it was 2 years right after Sapiens, so it would have been like 2013, called Guide. And it was a company that I was very passionate about the future of smart TVs and apps and things like that. And we were just starting to see these app platforms emerge on smart TVs. There's a lot of talk of an Apple TV coming out that never actually really materialized. And I was completely convinced that there was going to be an app revolution there, just like there had been in on our mobile devices. And so I was really looking for something that I thought would work in this environment that would be unique and interesting. And I'm still a very passionate news reader, and so my main go-to app on my phone was always my newsreader apps. And I thought to myself, well, what if people wanted to consume the blogs and stuff that I like to read, and I wanted to consume that passively on my TV? And you're not going to sit and read the TV. That doesn't make much sense. That's not, a mobile phone is a good one-to-one consumption device for reading, but a TV is really a one-to-many device. And so I thought, well, what if I could take text-based online news, blogs and news articles, whatever, and I could turn it into content that you could passively consume? What if I could take text and literally make it video with images and video clips and audio, and if I could do it on the fly? And that in itself is a pretty lofty goal.
Pretty big.
And we came up with this crazy idea at the time, where we were going to have avatars, literally three-dimensionally rendered avatars, like newscaster heads, effectively read you the news. And we were taking text news, we were shrinking it down to shorter news, and the newscaster would read you the news, and then we'd put images and video like classic, BBC type stuff over to the right. Um, well, conceptually really cool. There's this thing called the uncanny valley, and the uncanny valley, for those who aren't familiar with it, is basically a terrifying thing that happens when you see like like human faces. They're artificially rendered, and they look so fake that they literally freak you out.
Oh
It's like
God.
it's like a subconscious. Like, some people were freaked out by clowns, and some people were totally freaked out by seeing these like human renderings of people. I couldn't see it. And I'm not one of those people. I've never even heard of this thing called the Uncanny Valley. And I kind of wrote it off as like, it's not a real thing. So some people not didn't just dislike Guide; they were literally horrified by Guide. It
Caused,
would give them it
caused
would give them nightmares. I mean,
PTSD.
it was like,
Right.
yeah, it was like nightmare fuel to some people. And I was so convinced. I was like, I don't need I and on top of that, I built the whole app without actually talking to a bunch of users, because I was like,
Um,
in my own optimism. I'm not going to call it arrogance. It basically was like I just believed that this, was everything I needed. Hold on 2 seconds. This is classic ship here, by the way.
Are we having a
I
moment?
can actually hear a video a video chat for what a chat system is running in another window, and some people are talking over me, and I'm trying to figure out how to turn them off while we're talking. Good times. Oh, that is our ship in its at its finest right there.
Well,
Anyway, and
you're
apparently
brave to
everyone else
even
can
put
hear it
yourself
too.
into the oh
Yeah,
shit
yeah,
moment
that's hilarious. Okay,
scenario.
I just disconnected it. Thank God. Okay, thank you. That was fun. So all of you just got welcome to my gamer community of where I play video games with folks. Anyway, basically, that was really funny. Uh, so anyway, I just couldn't see it, and I didn't talk to users, and I just went out there and I just launched this thing, because I thought we was changing the world. In fact, I was so paranoid that this was such a revolutionary idea and so visionary that if anyone else saw it, they would steal it from me. And so I ran full force in this. Oh, and on top of that, I decided that I was so committed to the idea that I needed to launch it on Android and other platforms like web all at the same time
Oh
instead of
God.
MVPing it or testing it on one. Massive egg on my
But it is
face.
classic because it's incredible, and this is what makes you and so successful to have such a huge idea, such a bold idea that it's not the idea, that's ever the issue. It's just in this case, there's it was the how, and like the way that you ultimately were going to figure out how to get it launched that was either like you just didn't do it or it just wasn't a choice that you made that greatly impacted you. Well, thank you for
Like
sharing.
I'm glad I did it, and it's all experience. Worth noting, by the way, if you look now, there's all these tech out there. You hear about people talking about deep fakes and how they're making these like insane human stuff. Like if we had had the tech of deep fakes when I had done Guide, like I actually think this could do it. And we saw like some things the other day where people are doing actually things very similar to Guide now. They're actually awesome, but the tech is there now. Like
Yeah, it
the
wouldn't it
avatars
wouldn't
look
give people
real.
nightmares.
Yeah, yeah, and they don't, and they look real, and
Yeah.
they've gotten the voice synthesis is so much better than it used to be. We were just too early, but I think this
You
is a
were
great
early, but
example.
would you now, stop and ask for the feedback or stop and kind of check with some users? Like it's
Totally.
yeah.
Yeah, totally. That was a very painful experience for
Oh,
me and my investors, worth noting. And it was like I had a lot of my own money in it. Other people had very kindly and believed in the vision and put money in it as well. And I think, now I think it actually made me a better leader. I'd like to believe because now I'm never that I'd never really failed in a big way before that, and I think it was a really humbling experience that made me a better leader. And I seek consensus and advice from others far more now than I probably did before. Um,
wow.
I've been glancing at my notes while I've been talking to you. I had another question for you. I'm actually going to throw out one of my remaining questions because now that you've now that you've made me tell a no ship story, I'm actually stunned that I didn't have a no ship question for you. So
Hmm.
I'm going to throw out my weakest of my remaining questions, and I'm trading it up, and I'm now going to flip this back on you. I want you to tell me a story, an oh ship moment of where being a pragmatic leader has blown up in your face, and hopefully it's not as embarrassing as my one.
It's
Although I
embarrassing.
would like
It's
it to be even
embarrassing
better.
to me. It's embarrassing to me, but it's so small. It's on such a small little scale that it's not gonna compare to what you shared. But my story is it was a micro moment of a project. The project was we were working on launching an e-commerce site at a company that I worked at prior. It was, this was a little early in the day, so it was a big deal to be launching the site. And of course, everybody had input, because it's a business that covered lots of things: products, operations, sales, promotion, everything, branding. And so lots of input was coming in, and some conflict was starting to pop up about how, what we were putting in and the process that was happening to come up with the content, and get proper feedback from
Yeah.
subject matter experts in the
Yeah.
areas. And so the OSHIP moment was that, in my pragmatic way of just like, let's get to the heart of this and screw, hierarchy and politically, copying the world. I
Yeah.
picked up the phone back because, well, we used office phones at that
Yeah.
time, and I called the pretty junior person who
Yeah.
was involved in this content development piece and was having a conflict with someone on my team about the process. And I called this person directly. I'm like, tell me what's happening. I thought I was being like, wow, what a great leader, senior leader, kind
Yeah.
of reaching into the organization and wanting to hear, from the directly from the source, how things are going and feedback and listening for what it could be better. Well, that did not go over well,
Mm,
and from the senior leadership that person reported into,
mhm,
I got an earful, and,
mm,
that I did not respect hierarchy, and I did not involve management appropriately, and
mhm,
that style of communication was, certainly not desired or considered
mm,
helpful. It was considered to be detrimental and problematic, and
mhm,
such a small thing, but I remember it like it was
mhm,
yesterday.
mhm,
And it affected my relationship with that person, that peer,
mhm,
that leader,
mhm.
from that point on.
Mm. People, it's easy to write some of this kind of stuff off, but those kind of things, I mean, they can cause you problems for years, frankly, when you burn some of those burn some of those relationships down. So where I think where mine was like a painful entrepreneurial lesson, I think your is actually a really painful lesson of like, hey, if you're trying to be successful in especially in these larger global, even globally matrixed organizations, this is stuff that you really got to pay attention to because it can impact your career, it can impact your ability to be a successful leader, and frankly, it can have a lasting impact. Out of interest, how long do you think it took to make that kind of sting go away, if ever?
I still think of it like as if it
Yeah,
was yesterday,
yeah.
and my relationship with that person was never the same.
Wow. Then that is a proper ship moment. I appreciate you sharing that. By the way, that was very, very big of you. Um, cool. Well, what have you got for me?
All
Actually,
right.
no. Yeah. It's your turn. Yeah.
How much time do we have? I have to think about my questions before I want to go
we're
next.
good. We're good. We're tracking well.
So we just shared some OSHIP moments. Let's
Yeah.
let's let's open it up to a related topic
Okay.
question, which is: so, what do you perceive is the biggest challenge for pragmatic leaders like me?
That's a great question. I think that it is simply summarize it. I think finding the right balance between being pragmatic and being inspirational is essential. And I think, and I think that's, and this, you could argue this is good advice for inspirational, or visionary type leaders as well. I think that it's too much of something is not a good thing, and balance is really important. And maybe the way of thinking about it is almost like it's not even about balance all the time. It's about using the right tool as a leader at the right time, right? So sometimes I think if you can be really successful, it's not about pragmatism and breaking down things into the nuance of achieving it. Sometimes you just need to inspire people, and then sometimes people will get so um, you know hopped up on some idea that you need to kind of rope them back in. I was literally just having a chat yesterday with a crazy inspiring leader, maybe one of the most inspiring I've ever had a chance to work with, and a lot of the conversation was about like, hey, how do we focus? How do we rope things back in to get more things done? Because everyone's so inspired that they're trying to work on too many things, and we need to kind of prioritize now and think about what's where the focus is going to be. So it I think this idea of it being like it's like part of it as a good leader. Is this is part of our toolkit, right? This is what you tap into, and knowing when to play the card at the right time is I think is key. Um,
You're so right, because it's
yeah,
never one dimensional. I mean, I know even when
yeah,
we were talking about the topic for this session, it's
Yeah.
not like that's, the only card I play
Yeah.
or you play. We have to
Yeah.
play them all. There may be a bias and a
Yeah.
leaning in towards
Yeah.
one, particular style, but we need them all, and
Yeah.
it's all about finding the right time to employ the right tool.
Yeah, and I'd actually love to expand on this a bit because I think there are sometimes people, let's say you and I are pretty versatile players and can maybe play both sides of the court, but not everyone can play both sides of the court. So I'd say the other bit of advice I would give to pragmatic leaders, or I guess even inspirational leaders, is if you know that this is potentially a deficit for you, then you need to surround yourself with really good lieutenants. So a great example is I can think of some CTO type people that I know that have maybe come up through the technical career path and then become CEOs or C-suite leaders who are crazy brilliant, next level innovators, but actually not that good at decoupling, talking about the technology versus the implications of the technology, which is the inspiring part. Does that make sense? And
Yes.
so sometimes people need to have like you need like a good wing person
Yeah.
who like maybe is your Flavor Flav hype man. So if you're pragmatic, you're like you now you give them the big rah rah speech and let's get them all on there and or maybe they help craft that story and then you could argue the same as inverse. Again, I know plenty of inspiring leaders, probably more this way than the other way around, where I've kind of jokingly said to them, look, if you just had someone run around behind you with a giant basket collecting your ideas and then turning them into something practical, like you be absolutely killing it. So I'd say it's like, I guess, to simply summarize my response is the balance and selecting the right tool is key. And if you don't necessarily have those tools naturally in your personal tool set, then how do you compensate for that basically, and how do you build that, even if that means professional coaching, personal coaching, or just building the right team around you to succeed.
And I think, to build on what you're saying, it requires a level of self awareness to recognize it and also
Mm,
be okay with recognizing it. It's pretty rare that
mm,
any person or any leader has everything, all of those skill
mm,
sets, operating at top levels, and having the self awareness to kind of recognize it is a blind spot for me, or it is,
mm,
kind of not my, it's just not even what I
mm,
love,
mm,
about thinking or anything like that. And that's important as a leader, having that self awareness.
Worth noting, we had a question come in from the audience I'd like to read. And it says, being pragmatic opens the door of extreme efficiency and productivity, but sometimes people see the pragmatism as too, quote unquote, robotic. What are good ways to lead the team pragmatically, simultaneously, in a kind of inspired way? I think some of the stuff we just touched on, addresses that, but Lisa, is there anything you'd add to that, kind of responding to this specific question?
I think that it's about being human. I
Mhm.
don't think that the idea of pragmatic leadership, it's not like anybody's running around branding themselves. Like, I don't run around branding myself, that way. I
Mm.
just have a
I
bias.
took it off my business cards last year. I know what you're saying. That's kidding.
But you left
Freddie Laker,
idealist. You probably
visionary.
left idealist and visionary. Um, and so, if it's coming from a human place, that pragmatic approach can feel warm and human and inspiring, and we're in it together kind of thing, which, to me, that level of warmth and connectedness
Mm,
is
mm,
inspiring and promotes sort of feeling inspired. So that'd be
mm.
one
That's good.
suggestion.
That's good advice. Worth noting, by the way, I was joking about the putting it on your business cards, but one of my other pet peeves. We mentioned pet peeves earlier. I really hate when people put stuff like a visionary or that like describe their leadership style in LinkedIn. Is
Oh, I
like
better
is
note
that
to
it needs
self. I
yeah,
better go check.
or the guru or things like that. I'm like, no, take that off, please. Something only other people can say about you versus saying about yourself.
Agreed.
Um, so okay, great. So I think I'm up. I got to get work out these question
You
episodes
are
because
up.
I always lose my place. Okay, so looking at my notes here, let's do. we've got one. Okay. So on a show, we often talk about the importance of kind of showing you care as a critical leadership trait. Do you think pragmatic leaders approach this trait differently than idealistic or visionary leaders?
I mean, of course, we can never generalize, and no
Mhm,
one is one dimensional and only one thing, as we were talking about before. Um, if we were to generalize, we might say that the idealistic and visionary leaders are so focused on getting their idea, their big idea, you know, understood and pushed through,
mhm,
that they're not listening for. They're not reading the room. They're
mhm,
not seeing the need to connect the people around them who
mhm,
they need to,
mhm,
execute this wonderful idea and vision,
mhm,
and may not come off as being, empathetic or caring.
mhm,
So
mhm,
again, can't generalize, but that's a risk that
mhm,
that may impact their ability of coming off as sounding empathetic. What do you think?
mhm. I think it's funny. It actually is very much in line with that, talking about that robotic essence that was recently put up by one of the audience members. So yeah, I think that's yeah, it's a tricky balance to pull off. But I think at their core, any great leader is going to demonstrate heart. So
And
that's great.
I think
Look,
I would just sort of follow up to say, in this time,
mhm,
especially coming out of COVID, and just what, if we believe, and I think we do, that many people have gone through, difficult and sort of traumatizing time,
mhm,
just playing, amping up, turning up the empathy skill set in the toolkit of a
mhm,
leader is more important than ever. And
mhm,
employees have many choices, as we were all reading
mhm,
about, the Great Resignation, and
mhm,
people have gone through some crazy stuff, and
mhm,
it's just a must. Like, it's
mhm,
absolutely a requirement, even if it probably always has been. It's more than ever. It's a requirement to show some
mhm,
empathy.
mhm. Good advice. So I think we're down to our final two questions. Doing great. We're right kind of on time for this week's episode. So what's your last and final question for me?
I'm going selfish, and I'm thinking about me. So I am, and you've known me a long time. So in front of all your viewers, I'm going to ask you, what advice would you give a pragmatic leader like me to be more successful? I'm not done growing, and I'm not done, demonstrating what I can do. So, what advice do you have?
That's a good one. So again, I think I've witnessed you as leader full time, firsthand. I've seen how you interact with people, so I think I really have only positive things to say there. I think that as a broader answer, and this is something I've been sharing with other leaders lately, is you mentioned it earlier a second ago with the kind of great resignation, or whatever nickname you want to give for it right now. Um, this is a really profound time that we live in. Obviously we all experienced this crazy global event over the last couple of years together, and it had a dramatic impact on a lot of us in many different ways. Certainly and absolutely and unquestionably changed the way that we work, and I think it caused a lot of the team members that we have to reevaluate, what was important to them, certainly reevaluate the careers that they had, and reevaluate some of their priorities. And I think as a pragmatic leader, I think you when you're thinking about if part of that objective as a pragmatic leader is saying, right, how do I set these kind of clear goals and how do I achieve them? I think that they're easy to look at the building blocks of saying, here's a plan and how I need to get there. And I would say that there is a unseen part that now everyone should be thinking about, and that is the risk of disruption to how you achieve those goals, because people are not paying enough attention to the health and well-being of their team members. If people are not on the team, if they don't feel like you're prioritizing them, if they don't feel that you and the company, mean them well, and that you intend for them to succeed, and that their success is your success. I think we're in a time right now where people are doing these kind of evaluations of their employers and and their bosses, and they're going, I'm out. Like I'm out. Like I've saved up a bunch of money. I think part of the reason it's people are doing this, people are saying it's because of all the government aid. But I also think for a lot of people, they didn't spend a lot of money during the pandemic because they weren't out and about in restaurants and bars. Certainly, that's where I saved a ton of my money, and so people have these extra cash reserves. And they're going, you know what? I'm done. Like I'm over it. I'm over it. And I'm going to go find something better. And I think that. This is very much in the spirit of like saying, you having that heart and caring and empathy, which we addressed on earlier. But I think the pragmatic part is saying, look, I need to have those things too, but recognizing that plans will be seriously disrupted if this is not prioritized in a pragmatic and serious way. And I think that is sound advice for you and anyone like you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
And I would probably build on that just to say
Yeah.
you're so right. That feels kind of very close to home, and something that I need to probably think about even more in my day to day. And I would
Mhm.
add that further complicated by the business that I'm in. The being in the
Mhm.
cruise industry, coming out of the COVID time period where some days you're sailing and some days you're not because the ship shut down because there was
Yeah.
COVID cases. It's just it's an unbelievably volatile
Yeah.
time in this
Yeah.
industry, and it's further complicated already. People
Yeah.
working hard, and we have to really think about their well being.
Yeah, we didn't really hammer on that earlier. I don't think it needs to be said at this point, but you want to talk about a couple years of just nonstop oh shit moments, like trying to
Oh,
imagine being in the cruise industry is just crazy.
it's sort of
Um,
how we live.
yeah, so this is I'm about to do something that's so lame. I can't believe how much time I spent thinking about these questions, and I've never done this before. But I'm going to throw out another one of my questions. I should have just taken all your questions and like written them down, and as soon as you finish them, just be like, "How do I flip this in reverse?" and just ask you the same question back. But I love this. I love that you put me on the spot. So now I'm gonna hopefully not regret by asking you what advice, knowing how you know me and the way that you know me, and I think I'm sure worked with other leaders like me. What bit of a professional advice would you give me to be a more successful leader, as I guess what you've classed as a visionary or idealistic style leader?
Well, first we must stop and say, you are a successful guy,
Yeah.
and you probably don't need much advice from
I
me.
need lots of advice, actually. I'll take all the advice I can get, please.
Um, the funny thing, I guess, is of course probably listen. My advice would be listen to your own advice. So when you were sharing, and so honestly and vulnerably, kind of sharing your story of guide,
Mm,
and it was like on the one level it was an idea that was a bit ahead of its time, and all
mm,
that, and the scary avatars and all that was
mm,
plenty of oh ship in and of itself. But the heart of it from a leadership standpoint was you didn't really stop and ask anybody for any
mm,
feedback.
mm.
Your
Yeah.
people, your users.
I mean, why? It was clearly a perfect idea, Lisa. Jeez. I
um,
loved it, and I clearly represent everyone on Earth. So if I love it, like obviously everyone's gonna
of
love it. I mean,
course.
jeez.
So you said that you definitely incorporated that you've got to stop and get the feedback, and
Mm,
you need to. And you're such an open guy. I'm sure you have surrounded yourself with people that can be honest and open with you. Not
mm,
everybody is or willing to like
mm.
surround themselves with people that are going
Yeah.
to tell it to them like it is and give them the honest
I
feedback.
beg people to be honest with me, because it's I think sometimes people say like, look, they say, look, you're so energetic and infectious, Freddie, that like we get caught up in the moment. I was like, I'm begging you to call BS on me, because if you don't, I'm going to go out and say this publicly, and someone else is going to call BS on me in a very public way. So if you're really here to help me, then like I need you to call me out. And I thrive on it now.
And that's it. I mean, that's
And
what it's
now I
all.
do it publicly, and I curse people who call me out on live on live web chats, stepping it up every day here at O'Shea.
So yeah, that would be my advice, which you've already recognized. So listen to your own advice,
Well,
and
I think
all will be well.
that's great advice. Thanks, Lisa. I think that is a very fun place to end today's episode. I really enjoyed today. I want to do actually more episodes like this. I think these are super fun. I like the structure. I hope our audience is enjoying it because I think it's a nice way to consume information and relevant guidance and stuff, but also have a really fun conversation. I appreciate you taking the time to think of all those questions in advance. I know you really put some effort into it, so much effort that I stole two of them. So thank you for that. This is perfect.
My pleasure.
And I guess Lisa, what's the best way if people want to learn more about you or I guess follow you on social? Any guidance for our audience?
Sure. I'm on LinkedIn, under my name, Lisa Kauffman, part of Starboard Cruise Services, and that's probably the best place to find me on social.
Okay, awesome. So great. Again, thank you again. Thank you for everyone that tuned in today. Whether you're tuning in on any of our pre-recorded shows, whether that's on YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or you're listening to our audio podcasts across any of the major podcasting platforms, we thank you for tuning in. The best way you can support this show is by giving us a like, following if you're subscribing if you haven't done already, or sharing this on some of your social feeds. Again, thank you for watching, and Lisa, thank you again for coming, and we'll see all of you next week on our
Thank
ship.
you.